Hello there, and welcome. Tonight, let me gently take you back in time to a world where stone castles touched the sky, where hearths glowed in quiet chambers, and where nobles drifted to sleep under embroidered canopies as owls whispered through the rafters. A time where life moved slowly, almost like a dream, stitched together by rituals, honor, and the ever-turning seasons. So, find a soft place to rest, take a slow breath, and let your mind sink into the hush of history. For in this tale, we shall all walk the echoing halls of medieval Europe's noble class, not the kings or queens of fairy tales, but the lords, ladies, and their families, living lives both privileged and bound by duty. Beneath velvet cloaks and stone towers, their days were not so unlike ours, filled with longing, love, loss, and the deep silence of night. Let's begin. It is a moonlit winter's evening in the year 1274. The castle of Lord Emmerich of Windermere lies in the rolling hills of what we now call Burgundy. From the outside, its towers rise cold and resolute into the mist, but inside, all is warm and hushed. Fires flicker in braziers, casting dancing shadows on ancient stone walls. The servants have retired. The great hall is quiet. Lady Isolde, Lord Emmerich's wife, lays in her thick feather-stuffed bed, a book of prayers beside her. Her eyes are closed, her breath slow. Her youngest child, little Thomond, sleeps in the nursery nearby, under wool blankets dyed with onion skins and elderberries. All is still. This is the world we are about to explore, not in grand battles or royal feasts, but in the soft rhythms of daily life, in the sound of a lute string in a private chamber, in the rustle of silk gowns by torchlight, in the thoughts of a nobleman staring into the embers after midnight. The nobility were not just warriors or landowners. They were custodians of order, hosts of tradition, and often prisoners of their own prestige. In exchange for privilege, they bore the burden of inheritance, the weight of appearances, and the constant ticking of time measured in alliances and bloodlines. Lord Emmerich, like many of his kind, was born not to choose, but to continue. He was the fourth of his name, a title passed from father to son like an ancient key. Raised from infancy to ride horses, to read Latin, and to govern his estate, he had learned early that every choice must serve the family name. Marriages were arranged not for love, but for dowries and diplomacy. Education was not for curiosity, but for duty. Even leisure, the hunting trips, the chess games, was carefully calculated. Yet, within that rigid structure, there were quiet rebellions. Emmerich had once loved a woman who wasn't noble. Her name is barely remembered now, even in the old records. He had written her poetry in secret words pressed into folded parchment, hidden behind tapestries, but such things were not allowed. And in time, he did as he was expected. He married Lady Isolde, from a family with 3 coats of arms and enough land to feed his manor through winter. Over the years, affection bloomed between them, like moss on the cold stones. Not passion, perhaps, but comfort, respect, a kind of peace. Their castle, like many in Europe, was more than a home. It was a symbol of authority, a fortification of legacy. The walls were thick, nearly 4 feet in places, and cold to the touch, even in summer. Windows were narrow slits, built for defense, not light. The rooms were dark, unless lit by fire or candle. And yet, despite the cold and the weight of stone, there was beauty in the details. Tapestries woven with mythical beasts, carved oak beds, silver goblets etched with vines. Life in the castle followed a rhythm older than memory. Each morning, the bell would toll from the chapel, waking the household. Prayers came first, then the breaking of fast bread, sometimes cheese, thick beer, or watered wine. After that, the day unfolded in layers: estate matters, letters from neighboring nobles, disputes among peasants, preparations for travel, lessons for the children, and always the quiet whisper of diplomacy. But at night, when the fires dimmed and the castle slept, there was another rhythm. In the silence, thoughts wandered. Eyes stared into flame. The weight of names and deeds pressed softly down. And dreams, those secret ones not written in family records, stirred in the heart. Tonight, Emmerich sits alone. In his solar, his hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial dagger. His face is unreadable. He is 43 years old. He carries a lifetime of decisions on his shoulders, and yet he does not speak of them. He never has. Isolde sleeps nearby. Their children, 4 of them, dream in chambers above. The household is still. The guards make slow rounds along the ramparts, their torches flickering like fireflies in the dark. Outside, the land lies in snow, silent and endless. A wolf howls somewhere beyond the woods. This is where our story begins, not in glory, but in stillness. Not in battle, but in breath. Over the next nights, we will walk beside these people, Lord Emmerich, Lady Isolde, their children, their servants, their neighbors, and we will learn what life truly was for the medieval European noble. Not the polished tale of glory, but the whispered truth hidden in the spaces between. A world of heavy doors and whispered prayers, of embroidered hems brushing stone, of secrets sealed in wax, of legacy, both a gift and a chain. But for now, the castle sleeps, and so shall we. The morning bell rings. Its tone is low and deliberate, echoing through cold corridors, up winding stairs, and into chambers still touched by sleep. It is not a sharp summons, but a gentle herald, an old voice of the chapel reminding all beneath. This roof that the day has begun. In the master chamber, Lord Emmerich opens his eyes before the second toll. He is not a man who lingers in bed. His sleep is light, shaped by years of duty and the slow erosion of indulgence. The embroidered woolen covers are drawn back with care, and he rises with a soft grunt, reaching for the robe folded at the foot of the bed. The stone floor is cold beneath his feet. Always is, no matter the season. Lady Isolde stirs behind him, still beneath the covers. She says nothing, only watches as he moves through his morning rituals, pouring water from the brass pitcher into the basin, washing his hands, face, and then running a comb through his graying beard. She knows these motions by heart. She has watched them for 20 years. In the servants' wing, the household is already in motion. Boots shuffle softly. Wooden buckets slosh. Fireplaces groan to life one by one, coughing sparks into the gray half-light. Maids whisper to one another. The steward, Master Alaric, checks his list in a ledger, a meticulous book of ink and tally marks, recording every chicken laid, every candle burned, every acre harvested. All under the roof have their roles. And today, like every day, they must play them. Down in the chapel, the priest, Father Oswin, prepares for morning prayers. He is a thin, soft-spoken man, with eyes like rain clouds and fingers stained with ink. His voice carries just enough to be heard across the chapel nave, where tapestries hang heavy with scenes of saints and dragons. The family gathers slowly. Emmerich enters first, head bowed, hands clasped loosely before him. His children follow. Elric, the heir, already 13 and full of too much confidence. Willa, 10 years old and curious beyond measure. Baby Thomond is still asleep in the nursery, attended by a nursemaid. And Isolde, who arrives last, her expression composed, her mind already moving through the day's quiet demands. Morning prayers are short but constant. A blessing for the harvest, even in this frozen season. A request for peace on the roads. A whisper for strength, for wisdom, for protection from storms and rebellion alike. As the family kneels, the servants remain standing near the back, heads bowed, lips barely moving. It is a sacred pause before the gears of noble life begin turning. By mid-morning, Emmerich is in the solar, the private room where he conducts a state. Business, Scrolls lie opened on the table, weighed down with stones. A messenger has arrived from the nearby Abbey of St. Cyr, bringing word of an upcoming tithe negotiation. Emmerich reads silently. His steward stands beside him, awaiting instruction. Each letter is important. Each decision carries weight. The role of a noble, you see, was not one of idle leisure. Beneath the titles and silks were responsibilities that demanded constant vigilance. Lands needed tending, taxes collected, disputes settled. And always, there were relationships to maintain with neighbors, vassals, and the church. That morning, Emmerich hears a petition from a tenant farmer whose ox has died. Without it, the man cannot plow his fields come spring. A humble request is made for assistance. Emmerich nods thoughtfully, consults his steward, and promises to send a replacement from the estate's herd, though the man must repay with labor. In kind, fairness, he knows, breathes loyalty. This is nobility in its quietest, truest form, got not in banquets or gold, but in the daily upholding of order. Upstairs, Lady Isolde sees to the household matters. With her handmaid Rosette, she walks the inner court, checking the herb garden, inspecting the linen closets, and discussing the preparations for the coming Lent season. Salted meats must be set aside, ale brewed, fabrics stored to avoid damp. The steward may handle the tenants, but the lady of the castle rules its rhythm. She does not question it. It has always been so. Later, in her chamber, she receives a visit from Lady Amlet, a noblewoman from a neighboring manor. Their conversation, polite and restrained, hides currents of subtle judgment. Whose fabrics are finer this winter? Which family's children show the best Latin recitations? Each smile is measured. Every compliment weighted. In this world, words are weapons as much as swords. Willa, curious and often underfoot, listens from behind the tapestry. She finds the talk of herbs and marriages less interesting than her brother Elric's wooden sword practice in the yard, but she watches her mother carefully, absorbing the rituals of womanhood in a noble house. The midday meal is simple bread, boiled vegetables, dried meat, and watered wine, served first to the family, then to the retainers, then to the household staff. All eat in silence, or near to it, save for the occasional clink of utensils on pewter plates. Eoric asks about falconry. Emmerich answers with a tale of his own first. Hunt. Isolde smiles faintly. Willa feeds a scrap of bread to the dog beneath the table. The world beyond the castle is cold and wide. But here, for now, all feels contained, balanced, as if time itself pauses within these walls, stretching out each moment like the soft roll of parchment under a quill. Afternoons vary in noble life. Sometimes they bring visitors or letters from court, sometimes disputes among the peasants. Occasionally, moments of quiet leisure. Today, Emmerich walks the battlements, inspecting the repair work done after the last frost cracked the mortar. He speaks with the captain of the guard, hears word of movement on the roads travelers, perhaps merchants, or perhaps not. Caution is second nature here. Nobles must watch what others might overlook. Below, in the great hall, Willa receives a lesson in embroidery. She pricks her finger and scowls. Rosette soothes her, wraps it in cloth. A lady's hands tell her story, she says softly. And across the estate, life moves quietly, deliberately. Servants scrub benches. Boys stack firewood. Horses are brushed and blanketed in the stables. The castle breathes in cycles. A great, slow creature of stone and fire. As the sun begins its slow descent beyond the hills, and long shadows stretch across the snow outside. The noble house of Windermere prepares once again for evening. But that is a story for another time. 4. Now the morning has passed, full of rhythm and quiet duties, of expectations met without protest, of lives lived not in spectacle, but in slow, steady purpose. In the world of medieval nobles, every hour had a role, every role a ritual, and every ritual a reason. By mid-afternoon, the sun begins to shift, casting golden ribbons of light across the worn stone floors. The castle's heart beats slow just slightly. Duties have been seen to, the meal taken, and the warmth of the hearth has grown steady. This is the hour when the noble house of Windermere breathes inward. In the upper chambers of the keep, behind a carved oak door, lies the solar. It is the quietest room in the castle, reserved not for strategy or ceremony, but for reflection, reading, and the whisper of private conversation. Here, away from the ears of servants and the watchful eyes of the great hall, the family gathers not by order, but by choice. This afternoon, Lady Isolde sits by the window. A tapestry in progress rests in her lap, its threads trailing like tiny rivers of silk. She works slowly, thoughtfully, each stitch a meditation. Across the room, her daughter Willa curls near a low table, attempting again to master her French script with a quill too large for her hand. Occasionally, she sighs in frustration. Outside, the trees are bare. The snow has begun to melt in soft rivulets down the stonework, tapping against the windows like a distant lute. The solar is where truths live. In the flickering shadows, away from the demands of status and land, the noble family becomes something quieter, not rulers, but simply people. And like all people, they carry their secrets, their longings, and their grief. Lady Isolde has long kept hers folded in silence. She was not born in this castle, nor even this region. Her youth belonged to the southern hills, where the vineyards rolled and the summers stretched long and sweet. Her marriage to Emmerich had been arranged when she was but 15. She had known only his name, his banner, and the weight of duty. She was to carry. Now, nearly 20 years later, she knows every line of his face, every pause in his voice. And though they have shared children and firelight, she still wonders what dreams he might never speak aloud. She keeps a diary, though no one knows, hidden behind a panel in her personal chest. Each page a whisper, sometimes in Latin, sometimes French, sometimes only drawings. She writes not for history, but for herself. In a world where every word is watched, the solar is the one room where her thoughts feel safe. This afternoon, Emmerich joins them. His steps are quiet, not heavy with command, but thoughtful, as though he's returned from somewhere far off, though he's not left the walls. He nods to his wife, brushes a hand gently through Willa's hair, and then takes his place in the high-backed chair near. The fire. In his hands, he holds a scroll, an illuminated manuscript sent months ago from a Benedictine monastery, full of stories of saints and miracles. He reads without speaking for a while, lips moving silently. Willa watches him curiously. "Why do the saints always die at the end?" she asks. Emmerich looks up, surprised. He considers. "Because they lived with purpose," he says quietly. "And I. Such lives often end in sacrifice." Willa frowns. "That doesn't seem fair." "No," he replies. "It rarely is." And then he smiles, a small thing, but warm. In this room, he needn't be the Lord. He can be just a father, with tired eyes and thoughtful hands. Even Elric, the heir, finds his way to the solar now, and then, though not today. At 13, he is too restless for stillness, too eager to grow into the armor in the armory that does not yet fit him. He spends his afternoons with the weapons master, or watching the guards patrol the wall walks, memorizing the cadence of command. But he will return to this room someday, when ambition gives way to reflection, when he begins to see the castle not as a fortress, but as a vessel of memory. Later, as the light continues to soften, Isolde sets aside her stitching. She moves toward the bookshelves, precious things, built by hand, filled with volumes collected over generations. Not many nobles read fluently, but this house has always prized knowledge. There are psalters, romances, chronicles, even a small treatise on stars, its vellum stiff and yellowed. She selects a thin book of poetry, one she's read dozens of times. Its edges are worn, its meaning ever-changing. As she reads, she forgets for a while the weight of the hall, the balance sheets, the expectations. Here, she remembers who she might have been. If she had lived another life, outside the solar, life continues. In the kitchens, onions are chopped. In the armory, oil is rubbed into leather. A mason patches a crumbling corner of the courtyard wall. But in this upper chamber, time feels suspended. The fire crackles. Willa has fallen asleep beside her book, her hair spread like gold across the fur-lined cushion. Emmerich sits still, scroll open but unread, his gaze lost in the flames. And Isolde, now kneeling beside her daughter, brushes a loose thread from Willa's tunic. The castle is stone. It is steel and frost and echo, but the solar is warmth, memory, and the quiet pulse of lives. Unfolding gently behind the veil of duty. Evening will come soon. The hall will fill again. Songs may be sung, and the hearths will blaze. There will be stories told to guests, and eyes watching every gesture. But for now, the long shadows reign. This is the part of noble life few ever see. The inward gaze, the pauses between history's louder notes. Is where hearts speak in silence, where souls find space to remember themselves, and where, if one listens closely, the stones of the castle seem almost to breathe. The sun slips beneath the horizon, casting long indigo streaks across the fields, and the castle awakens once more, this time not with labor, but with presence. It begins with the lighting of torches. Servants walk the corridors with iron holders, and long tapers, touching flames to the wall sconces one by one. The light dances and stretches, bringing the castle to life again, flickering across old beams, armored suits, and the portraits of ancestors long gone but never quite silent. Then the great hall fills. Not suddenly, but in a slow, deliberate procession, as if each person knows precisely when and where to appear. First, the retainers, men who serve in arms or council, take their seats along the lower tables. Then the steward and chamberlain, their robes dark and their eyes keener than one might guess. Musicians settle near the hearth, tuning their lutes, and rebecks testing sound against the vastness of stone. Above them all, upon the dais at the far end, the high table waits. There, the lord and lady will sit, framed by a tapestry of the family crest, a crimson boar under a winter moon. Lord Emmerich enters last. He is never late, but never early. That, too, is a performance. Each step he takes from the archway to the dais is measured, not hurried, not slow. Every pair of eyes watches him, the young knights eager to learn, the guests hoping for favor, the guards assessing the readiness of their leader. This is no simple meal. This is Cork in miniature. His tunic is trimmed in black fox fur tonight, his ring glinting gold in the firelight. At his side walks Lady Isolde, graceful and composed, her sleeves trailing like banners. To the left and right trail their children. Elric, tall and straight-backed, trying not to fidget. Willa, her curiosity barely masked by her practiced solemnity. High table fills, and the room hushes. Dinner begins. It is not opulent, not in the way of royal banquets with sugared peacocks and fountains of wine, but it is ordered, warm and plentiful. Trenchers of coarse bread are laid first, then bowls of barley stew, roasted duck, and early winter greens. The smell of rosemary and baked roots hangs gently in the air. Servants move with careful rhythm trained over years to appear invisible, yet always present when needed. One lad, no older than Willa, spills a bit of mead while refilling a cup. He pales, but Emmerich only nods softly, waving the boy on. Discipline, yes, but mercy as well. The room breathes again, as the meal continues. Conversation blooms, it travels. In waves across the room, deep and jovial near the retainers, clipped and cautious near the visiting merchants, who speak of river traffic and taxes. At the high table, Lord Emmerich engages in talk of recent court decrees. The bishop's men have been asking more questions in the east. A new reeve appointed. A noble cousin imprisoned quietly, discreetly. There is no need for outrage here. Only awareness. Nobles who survive do so by listening more than they speak. Lady Isolde, too, plays her part. She compliments a guest's embroidered mantle. Inquires about a distant cousin's recovery from illness. She moves through the verbal currents with ease, not because she enjoys it, but because she understands its necessity. These conversations are threads. Woven well, they strengthen alliances. Woven poorly, they unravel households. And tonight, she senses a thread coming loose. Across the hall, seated near the fire, is Sir Ralph, a once loyal retainer of Emmerich's father. His absence in the last month had gone unexplained, and now his eyes linger too long on Elric, as if measuring the boy. Isolde notes this, stores it away behind her composed smile. Nobles learn early that danger rarely arrives with shouting. It arrives with silence. The musicians begin a soft tune. A ballad, old and half forgotten, about a knight who loved a spirit bound to a winter tree. The melody rises like mist, curling through the rafters, mixing with the soft laughter and clinking cups. Even the hounds lying near the hearth seem to grow still. Willa, too young to be required in courtly conversations, listens with wide eyes. She tugs her brother's sleeve. "Is it true?" she whispers. "Can spirits be trapped in trees?" Elric scoffs, but he doesn't answer. After the meal, the entertainment begins. Not every night only, on those when tensions are low and visitors present. Tonight, a traveling jester has been granted entry. He performs illusions with coins and end. Cloth tells a tale of a fox who fooled a king. His accent is foreign, perhaps Burgundian, and though some words are muddled, the spirit of the tale is clear. Even Emmerich laughs once, softly, but his eyes never stray far from his people. That is the burden of command. One must never fully relax, even among laughter, especially among laughter, for in joy, masks slip. And behind every mask, a motive. When the jester bows and departs, the room lingers in the warmth. Wine is offered again. Those who have earned favor may approach the dais and speak. Tonight, an aging knight asks for permission to send his youngest son to page at Windermere. Emmerich agrees with care. "Let him come after Epiphany," he says. "The roads are clearer then." The knight bows. Another thread tied. And slowly the room begins to empty. Guests retreat to their chambers. Servants clear the tables, stacking trenchers and scraping scraps into wooden buckets. A fire burns lower. The music fades. But before leaving the dais, Emmerich turns to his steward. "Have the guards noted any new riders on the East Road?" He asks almost casually. "None, my lord," comes the reply. Emmerich nods, but his expression says otherwise. In a noble's world, every evening is a ledger, not only of coin, but of glances, silences, and unspoken things. And so the great hall empties, its echo lingering just a moment longer. The torches are snuffed, the benches bare, the hearth quiet. But the games played here, games of power, alliance, suspicion, and image, do not sleep. They only wait. In noble life, presence is a performance, and every performance is remembered. Night has fallen, not the twilight hush of early evening, but the deep and velvet dark that presses softly against the walls of Windermere. The last embers in the great hall's hearth have given their final glow, and all that remains are the long, slow creaks of settling timber and stone. The castle is not asleep, not fully. It never truly is, but it grows quiet like a beast at rest, curled within itself, breathing in long, steady sighs. At this hour, the servants move in silence, their footfalls muffled on rush-strewn floors, their words whispered and half-spoken. Tones. Most of the nobles are in their chambers. Fires are banked, curtains drawn, doors latched against the cold. And still, the castle listens. A lone guard passes beneath the arch of the east wing. He walks slowly, torch in hand, casting light along the wall walk where the wind whistles without melody. His chainmail hums softly with each movement, a lullaby of iron. And duty. He stops briefly to adjust a loose buckle, peers into the night where the hills roll endlessly beneath the moon. All is still, but stillness is not peace. Inside, Lady Isolde stands at her chamber window. Her long robe trails behind her. Like the hem of a dream, her hair braided and bound. In her hands, she cradles a silver cup of spiced wine, warm, fragrant. Untouched. She cannot sleep. The hours of night are different from those of the day. They do not demand action or decision. Instead, they make space for memory. And memory, she has learned, is a delicate thing, soft and sharp all at once. The castle she now calls home still feels foreign in the dark. Even after years, she knows its walls, knows the patterns of its flags and the creak of its doors. But at night, her heart still drifts southward to the cypress groves of her youth, to the scent of olive wood and sweet smoke. To the girl she used to be, long before the title of lady ever settled on her shoulders like a mantle of frost. Elsewhere, Lord Emmerich walks the corridor alone. He does this often not because of unrest, but because of habit. He believes a lord must know his castle, not just by day, but by the dark as well. He knows the path by memory, past the gallery where tapestries hang like sleeping giants, through the chapel where votive candles flicker in their iron nests. He pauses here, in the chapel. Beneath the carved gaze of St. Hubert, he kneels. Not long, not in supplication, but in reflection. He does not ask for victory, or favor, or even forgiveness, only clarity. And in return, he receives only silence. But sometimes that is enough. Beyond the chapel, in the western wing, a chambermaid slips through. A half-hidden door. She carries fresh linens over one arm, a candle in the other. Her name is Anselma, and she is quiet by nature, trusted by Lady Isolde for her discretion. She hums as she works very softly an old tune from the coast, about a fisherman and the sea. In her mind, the nobility live far away. Even here, in their presence, they seem unreachable like stars glimpsed through high windows. Their burdens, their fears, their hungers, all wrapped in silks and ceremony. But sometimes Anselma catches a glimpse beneath it, a hurried whisper between lord and steward, a tear quickly wiped before a mirror, a crumpled letter burned in the hearth before anyone can read it. She never speaks of these things, not because she is afraid, but because, in some quiet corner of her soul, she understands. Young Elric lies awake in his chamber. The fire has been lowered. The hound at the foot of his bed snores softly, twitching in dreams. But Elric's eyes are wide. Tomorrow, the weapons master will test him again, with real blades, not the wooden ones he's outgrown. His heart beats fast, just thinking of it, not from fear, but something stranger, a blend of hunger and doubt. He wants to be strong, to be respected, to be worthy, but he wonders what it means, truly, to be a lord. He has seen his father smile and command, but he has also heard him speak to no one, late at night, near the fire. Murmured words, names, regrets, Warnings. Does being a noble mean always being watched? Always pretending to know? Outside his window, a lone owl calls. It sounds for a moment like a question. Not far away, Willa sleeps deeply. She dreams of snow that falls upward, and of trees that whisper her name. Her blanket has fallen half to the floor, her ink-stained fingers curled near her cheek. On the small table beside her bed lies an unfinished letter. It begins, "To the lady I have never met," and ends abruptly. She does not know yet who. 4. Only that some part of her needs to write it. The castle holds its breath. The wind picks up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere above, near the tower's top, a flag flutters restlessly. The guards make their rounds. The embers in the hall sigh into ash. And the noble family, each in their own chamber, each with their own thoughts, waits for sleep to come. They are not alone. They are never alone. The stone remembers them. The night watches them. And the castle, ancient and vast, holds every dream, every secret, every whisper in its cold, unshaken walls. Some say the dead walk in castles at night. But perhaps it is not the dead at all. Perhaps it is only the living, wandering the spaces between memory and duty, love and expectation, youth and legacy. Seeking, always seeking, something unnamed. There is a chamber in Windermere Castle that few enter, not for fear, nor for secrecy, but for reverence. It lies behind a thick oaken door bound in iron, near the northern tower. Inside, the air is always cold, no matter the season and the zin. Windows are narrow, meant only to invite light, never wind. Upon the walls hang portraits, most of them faded, some unfinished. They do not smile. They never did. This is the Hall of Names, the room where legacy is remembered, not in gold, but in silence. Lord Emmerich stands here now, alone. He often comes to this place when a decision waits. He does not speak to the paintings, nor pray beneath the carved family crest mounted above the hearth. He simply stands and listens to the quiet that fills the room like deep water. That each man upon these walls bore the same name, or nearly so: Emmerich, Ulrich, Oswin, Theobald. All lords of Windermere. All men who carried sword and scepter. All who were, in time, buried beneath the chapel floor, wrapped in linen and iron. He does not know if they were kind, only that they endured. And in this, he is expected to do the same. Lineage is not a list. It is not the ink on a family tree, nor the seal pressed into wax. It is a living thread stretched across centuries, taut with expectation. To be a noble is to stand on that thread, never allowing it to break. Every choice, every alliance, every heir must serve that thread. Even love, if it comes, must wait its turn. When Emmerich was a boy, he asked his father why they kept such a room. Because men forget, the old lord had said, running a finger along the dusted edge of a book of lineages. And forgetting is more dangerous than war. But they're just paintings, Emmerich had replied. No, his father said, they are mirrors that wait. He had not understood then. He understands now. In her solar, Lady Isolde examines a box wrapped in linen and velvet. Inside, carefully folded, rests a wedding veil once worn by her mother, and beneath it, a letter sealed and never opened. The wax is cracked now. She does not break it. She has kept it for years, not out of sentiment, but because of the name on the front. To my daughter, when she becomes a wife. She was 16 when it was given to her. The day before her wedding, she has never opened it. She does not know why. Perhaps she fears that within its pages lie words she cannot afford to feel, memories that would weaken the steel she's forged around her. Heart. Legacy is not always built on strength. Sometimes it is built on silence. Elric trains in the courtyard, blade in hand. The weapons master corrects him sharply, not cruelly, but precision. His arms ache. His breath shortens. But still, he does not stop, because above the practice yard hangs a banner, the same crimson boar that adorned the high table, the same his father wears on his signet ring. It is more than a symbol. It is a reminder that he is not simply a boy. He is a continuation, a vessel through which dead men's hopes flow like blood. He sometimes wonders who he might have been without it, but there is no time for such wondering. Not in this house. Below the keep, in a locked vault, the family records are kept, scrolls of land grants, letters of vassalage, marriage contracts signed by hands now long turned to dust. Every noble house has its archive, and every noble child is raised with its stories. Tales of valor and betrayal, of alliances struck in desperation, of marriages arranged at sword point. Of a grandfather who killed his own brother for the family name. These stories are not told for entertainment. They are warnings. They are the maps by which the next generation must navigate. And yet, for all the gravity that lineage holds, it is strangely fragile. A single failed harvest, a war lost, an heir fallen ill in winter. And a name that once opened doors becomes a whisper lost to ivy and ruin. Every noble house knows this. Every nobleman feels it in his bones, that what they build is not eternal. Only the attempt at eternity is. Willa, curious and untamed, sneaks into the library one afternoon when her governess naps. She finds a book with a broken spine and faded script, a history of the high families of the North. She turns pages slowly, dragging her fingers across names strange, noble, forgotten, some with grand titles, some ending with the quiet note, extinguished, no issue. She reads it like a ghost story, because, in a way, it is. These were people once, with hopes and laughter and nights like hers. And now, no one remembers their voices. She closes the book gently, as if laying a body to rest. Then she returns to her room and writes a single sentence in her notebook. If no one remembers. You? Were we truly noble? That night, at dinner, Lord Emmerich announces the engagement of his cousin's daughter to the heir of House Barrand. There is polite applause, but little warmth. Everyone knows what it means. Two weakened houses trying to bind themselves against the coming storm. Willa looks at her mother and sees a flicker of something almost pain, almost memory. Lady Isolde lifts her goblet, and the moment vanishes. After the meal, as the family departs to their separate corners of the night, Emmerich lingers in the Hall of Names once more. This time, he brings a small oil lamp. He stands before the oldest painting barely visible beneath a veil of dust. A man whose eyes seem both stern and sorrowful. Beneath the frame, a plaque reads only, Oswin I, builder of Windermere. Emmerich leans in close and whispers, I wonder what you feared most. But the portrait, as always, says nothing. Only watches. As if waiting for an answer of its own. Lineage is not glory. It is weight. And every noble child learns, sooner or later, that their name is not theirs alone. It is borrowed. And one day it must be returned. Windermere does not slumber long. By dawn, its halls are already abuzz, not with the murmurs of routine, but with the crisp urgency of preparation, the kind of hum that travels through walls like a distant drumbeat. Visitors are coming, and not just any visitors. A party from House Ventara, an old and influential family from the Southlands, known for their silk-clad banners and fleet of hawks. They travel with their own cooks, falconers, and priest. It is not a short stay. 3 nights, 4 suppers, 2 formal councils, and 1,000 ways to be remembered or forgotten. Lady Isolde oversees the arrangements personally, though she trusts her steward and her housekeeper and her kitchen mistress. There are things that no servant, however skilled, can fully account for. The placement of seating, the texture of cloth, the scent of herbs in the hand-washing bowls. These are the brushstrokes that paint power in silence. Because in the noble world, a meal is never just a meal. It is a statement, a negotiation in roasted. Pheasant and sugared plums in the courtyard. Groom's Polish tack until the leather gleams. The stables must be spotless. The hawks in prime condition. Even the dogs, those shaggy, noble creatures, are scrubbed and brushed, until they resemble sculptures more than animals. No one must seem unprepared. No one must forget that honor lives in the margins. Young Elric is not calm. He has been asked to escort Lord Ventara's sons on a hunt. It is meant as a gesture of goodwill, an exchange of youthful energy and shared interest. But to Elric, it feels more like a test wrapped in fur and frost. He polishes his boots twice, his belt once, then rechecks the fastenings on his bow, though he's done it a dozen times already. The idea of the hunt doesn't frighten him, but being watched does. Willow watches the preparations from a distance. She's not old enough to sit at the high table, not yet, but she's old enough to feel the shift in the air, like the moment before a storm. She watches the halls being draped in their ceremonial banners, dark red and silver for House Windermere, deep blue and white for Ventar, a dot in her journal. She sketches a falcon with outstretched wings. Above it, she writes, "Even birds must play at politics." When the guests arrive, it is not with fanfare, but with precision. The horses are tall and smooth-gaited, their riders straight-backed, cloaked against the wind. The nobles descend like dancers from a distant stage, elegant, composed, there. Smiles both warm and unreadable. Lord Emmerich greets them with measured grace. A deep bow, a hand extended, a phrase spoken in the southern tongue, just enough to be respectful. He does not overdo it. That, too, would be a mistake. And so, the play begins. The first night's feast is an affair of color and command. The long tables groan beneath their offerings. Salted fish with golden onions, veal in wine, honey-glazed root vegetables, custards. Shaped like birds, jesters tumble through the hall. Minstrels play a soft tune beneath the rising voices. Lady Isolde has chosen her gown with great care silver embroidery in the shape of frost-covered vines. Her hair braided with pearls. Laughs gently when required, but her eyes are always watching. Every gesture is measured. Every comment weighed. A compliment on the venison becomes a subtle reminder of her family's hunting lands. Jest about northern winters is answered with a tale of a Venturin knight who froze his lance to a tree. Soft laughter follows, but it is not amusement that fills the air. It is calculation. At the lower tables, the younger nobles mingle in uncertain rhythms. Elric finds himself next to Ronan, the elder Ventara's son. The boy is taller, older by 2 years, with the lean, casual grace of one who knows he is watched and enjoys it. They speak of horses, of hounds, of the art of tracking. And beneath every word lies a question neither of them asks outright. Are we rivals or brothers? Willa, sitting farther down still, sneaks bites of plum tart between long, careful stares at the guests. One of the southern women, Lady Elaine, wears a ring of dark garnet shaped like a serpent. Willa is fascinated. She doesn't know why, only that it feels like a story she wants to write, but doesn't know how yet. Later that evening in the solar, lit by a dozen candles, the council is held. No raised voices, no declarations. Just offers dressed as suggestions, promises clothed in pleasantries. Land is discussed. Timber writes. A possible match between Emmeric's young cousin and one of the Ventara grandsons. Nothing is agreed upon, but everything begins. These are the evenings that shape seasons. When the guests retire to their chambers, The castle exhales. The servants scatter like shadows, collecting plates, banking fires, checking windows. Isolde removes her jewels slowly as one sheds armor. Her fingers ache from tension. Emmerich says nothing as he enters the chamber, but she sees the weight in his shoulders. She kisses his brow, not as a lover, but as a comrade. Fellow architect of masks. The next day brings a hunt, and with it, spectacle. Trumpets echo through the trees. Hounds bark wildly as they're loosed into the woods. The lords ride high and swift, laughing as they thunder over the frosted grass. Elric at last finds his stride. He rides true. He strikes well. And when he returns with the stag tied behind his saddle, even Ronan nods not mockingly, but with something. Near respect. It means more than words could. Back at the castle, a second feast awaits. This one quieter, more familiar. The veterans relax slightly. The laughter softens. Wine flows more freely. And in that softened moment, something happens. Not diplomacy, not strategy, but something smaller, more real. Lady Elaine leans toward Isolde and asks, "Do you ever miss the South?" Isolde pauses, then answers, quietly, "Only when I smell rosemary." And for a moment, two women with burdens folded into silks see each other, just briefly, as women, not banners. Feasting, at its heart, is not about food. It is about seeing and being seen. It is the theater of power. And for those who sit at the table and those who serve it, it is where the true stories begin. The morning mist lies low over Windermere. The castle's towers stretch into a pale sky, and from the high windows of the east wing, a faint light begins to stir. It is not the clamor of knights or the shuffle of servants that fills these corridors, but the softer, stranger rhythm of childhood. For beneath every stone of power and tradition, there are children watching and waiting. Willa wakes before the bell, not because she is told to, but because her mind refuses to sleep any longer. She lies still for a moment in her canopy bed, the velvet draped like a forest around her. Outside her chamber, she hears the soft footsteps of Maud, her nursemaid, and the faint swish of the brush as the hearth is swept. Willa does not move yet. She stares at the ceiling, carved with roses and stars, and wonders if she will be a rose, or a star when she is older. Perhaps neither. Perhaps something else. 2 floors below, Elric tightens the straps of his training vest. His limbs still ache from yesterday's hunt, but he knows better than to speak of it. The squires have already gathered in the practice yard, and Sir Tolland, their instructor, waits with a gaze sharp as a blade. No child of nobility becomes a knight through title alone. The journey begins young, at 7 or 8, when the boy is made a page, and then at 14, a squire. And every lesson, every bruise, every day begun in frost and ended in sweat, is meant to shape not just the body, but the soul. Elric's friend Osbert stumbles on the cobbles as they run drills. He laughs it off, but Sir Tolland is merciless. "Fall once, and a man may rise again," he says, voice like flint. Fall twice, and he dies with a sword in his belly. Elric watches, heart thudding. He does not wish to die with a sword in his belly, but he also wonders, secretly, what would happen if he laid the sword down entirely. That thought he tells no one, not even Osbert. In the schoolroom above the chapel, Willa is drilled in Latin, heraldry, and etiquette. Her tutor, Master Huldrych, has fingers stained with ink and thief, a voice like dry parchment. He calls her clever, but only when she sits still and says little. Clever girls, he tells her, become clever wives. Remember that, Lady Willa. But Willa doesn't want to be clever in that way. She wants to write the words, not just read them. To speak her mind, not just listen. She draws dragons in the margins of her history scrolls. So far, No one has noticed At midday, the children are allowed into the garden. Willa sits beneath the frost-rimmed arbor, watching the birds skitter over bare branches. Across the gravel path, Eric eats bread with Osbert, speaking in low tones about sword grips and saddle leathers. They do not speak to each other, not because they dislike one another, but because childhood in the castle is like a chessboard. Boys, trained for power. Girls prepare to be near it, and few of them are ever told why. Lady Isolde watches from her chamber window, veil drawn just enough to soften the light. She sees her daughter tracing leaves with a stick, and her son throwing pebbles into the fountain between drills. She does not smile. She only wonders how long she has before the world claims them both. Before Willa is asked to bow. Before Elric is asked to bleed. Later that week, a courier arrives from House Granthorn inside the sealed scroll. News of a betrothal offer for Willa. The boy is 11. A future duke. His family is powerful, and the match on parchment makes perfect sense. Lady Isolde does not answer right away. She sits alone in her study, the scroll open beside a candle, reading it again and again. She imagines Willa's face, how her eyes narrow when she's pretending not to cry, how she is still only 10. But 10 is not young in a noble house. 10 is nearly woman. Willa hears of it from a passing servant. She says nothing to her mother that evening, but she stops writing in her journal for 3 days. When she finally opens it again, she writes a single sentence. If my name must be given away, I hope they let me keep my voice. Elric's test comes sooner. A knight injured in the borderlands has sent word. He will take a squire for the next campaign. Sir Talon selects Elric without hesitation. You will leave within the fortnight. He says Elric bows, but later he sits alone in the armory, polishing his father's old sword, and wonders if his courage is just performance, if he would feel braver were he allowed to say, I am afraid. But noble boys are not taught how to say such things, only how to march through them. That night, Willa finds Elric standing by the outer gate, staring into the fog beyond. Are you leaving? She asks. He nods. Soon. She looks down at the cold stones between them. Then she says, I hope you remember who you are, even when they try to make you someone else. He looks at her. Really looks, and replies, You too. Children in noble houses do not grow up the way others do. They do not leap or fall or fail in full view. They are shaped like statues chiseled slowly, surrounded by marble expectations. But beneath it all, they are still flesh. Still hearts, still questions waiting for answers. Evening descends on Windermere, not with fanfare, but with grace. The torches are lit in silence. The bells do not toll. And in the solar high above the bustle of hearth, and hall Lady Isolde removes her veil with care, as if shedding not just fabric, but armor. Her chamber is warm and perfumed with lavender. A fire crackles. A silver basin waits beside the cushioned stool, steam rising gently from its scented water. There is no audience here. And yet she sits with the same perfect posture, as she does before the high lords, even in solitude. Lady Isolde does not forget who she is. The world of a noblewoman is not loud. It is not ruled with swords or declarations. It is built in gestures, refined in silence, measured in outcomes that appear to bloom on their own, though they are carefully sown, root by root, decision by decision. A good lady does not need to shout to be obeyed. She only needs to raise an eyebrow or withdraw a favor. Isolde was not born at Windermere. She came here 17 winters ago. A bride of 17 herself, 1 carriage, 2 handmaidens, and a dowry large enough to restore the northern wall and build the chapel anew. She had not loved Emmerich then. Not truly, but she had respected him, and he had listened to her more than Most men listened to women in her world. That had been enough. It became something more. In time. Something real. Not always soft, but real. Now. She rules her part of the household like a miniature kingdom. She knows the names of every servant, every cook, every nursemaid and brewer and butcher. She knows which merchant cannot be trusted with coin, which cousin may be swayed with flattery, which visiting bishop smiles too broadly at the serving girls. Her world is made of subtleties, and she speaks the language fluently. When a noble lady receives guests, she does not simply pour wine. She watches where their eyes drift. She notices who hesitates before speaking, that she measures the fabric of their cloaks, the dust on their boots, the frequency with which they glance toward the door. Isolde once turned away a marriage proposal for Willa, based on the way the boy spoke to his falconer. He would strike harder when no one is watching, she said simply. Emmerich had trusted her judgment. He always did, when she spoke like that. In the castle's great ledger, her hand keeps records as sharp as any steward, not just of coin and grain, but of favors owed and promised, of which families grumble in their letters, of which ones praise. Windermere too much. She writes nothing down for these, but she remembers. She advises her husband with words carefully chosen, so that they might sound like his own when spoken, aloud in council, not because she wants credit, but because she wants results. There are other kinds of power, too. She uses her embroidery not only for decoration, but for code, stitching messages into handkerchiefs meant for allies. A certain pattern here, a bloom of certain color there. It is not treason. It is insurance. In a world where noble women are expected to stay silent. Her voice travels in threads and glances. In the charity she offers to widows. In the stories she reads to Willa, choosing tales where the clever girl outwits the sorcerer, not where she is rescued by the prince. She meets with the apothecary once a month, alone. There, she learns about tinctures, infusions, the properties of herbs that ease pain or deliver sleep. That never ends. No one asks why she takes such interest. She does not offer the reason. But in Windermere, no servant dares to cross her, and none of the younger knights are foolish enough to mistake her kindness for naivety. Some nights, she writes letters long into the dark. Her script is elegant, steady. She corresponds with her sister at court, with the Abbess of Ivelmere, with Lady Broom, who lives 3 counties south and knows the way the wind is shifting in the capital. The letters are signed plainly and sealed with a ring, but their contents have shifted entire trade routes, delayed marriages, averted war. None will ever sing of her in battle songs, but they will live in peace because of her. And perhaps that is enough. In Willa, she sees a girl not unlike herself, but bolder. Brighter. Unwilling to hide her fire behind gentle hands. And though it frightens her some days, this wildness in her daughter, it also thrills her. For Willa will not be anyone's quiet shadow, not unless she chooses to be. And Isolde, in her quiet way, is teaching her how to choose. Sometimes, when the castle sleeps, she walks alone on the ramparts. The guards bow and move aside. She carries no torch, but she knows the path well. From this height, she can see the far road, the dark forests beyond it, the stars so distant they seem etched into stone. And she whispers to the wind, let them think the power lies in the sword. Let them never know it lies also in the candle, in the letter, in the silence after the feast. The quiet power of the lady is not passive. It is patient. It is deliberate, and it is woven into every stone of the castle she commands, not through fear, not through force, but through the kind of wisdom that never needs to announce itself, because it is already everywhere. Winter has settled over Windermere like a velvet shroud. The towers wear caps of snow. The paths, once alive with clatter and laughter, now lie muffled beneath pale silence. Fires are stoked in every hall. Tapestries hung thick to ward off the cold. And still, the chill finds its way through the stone. But inside the great hall, something else stirs. Something older than snow. Older, even, than the castle itself. Politics, the careful theater of power. Each year, during the heart of winter, Windermere opens its gates not for battle, but for guests. High-born families arrive from neighboring regions, cloaks lined in fur, their banners fluttering against the white sky. With them come retainers, musicians, flatterers, and ambitions dressed in velvet. To the outside eye, it is a gathering of merriment feasts, hunts, dancing, and tales told beside roaring fires. But beneath the mirth lies a different season entirely. A colder one, where every smile is a strategy, and every compliment a test. Lord Emmerich sits at the head of the table, but he is not the only one watching. Lady Isolde keeps her eyes half lowered, her goblet untouched. She listens not only to words, but to what remains unsaid, the glances exchanged between rival houses, the way Lord Halfred of Fenmere avoids mentioning his youngest son, the curious absence of Lady Fiona, who was once promised to visit. Each silence is a breadcrumb. Each question unanswered. A map. Young Lord Ansel of Dareth arrives late. He wears a ring set with tourmaline, more valuable than it should be for a second-born son. Willa notices, though she says nothing. She notices, too, the way he stares a beat too long at the map of Va. The realm displayed in the study, his eyes lingering over the border between Windermere and the southern marshes. Later, she mentions it to her mother. Isolde only nods. And sets aside a different wine to serve Ansel at the next feast. One that loosens tongues. The great hall is dressed in candlelight. Musicians play lutes and viols, while nobles circle the floor in slow, deliberate steps. To dance here is not merely to pass the time, it is to declare something. A future betrothal, a favored alliance, a rising tension. Willa is asked to dance by 3 lords that night. She accepts none. Instead, she watches, learning who steps too quickly, who avoids whose gaze, who smiles with their lips only. At the long tables, conversation flows like mulled wine. But it is not the drink that warms the guests, that it is the thrill of being seen, of being heard, of weaving words in a way that implies knowledge, but never fully shares it. There are whispers of a new bishop to the west, a rising merchant house gaining favor in the capital, noble family whose heir was quietly removed from succession after a scandal. No one dares name. Isolde listens, smiles, says little, but her hand moves later that night, adding a new letter to her writing desk, sealed not with a ring, but with a lesser-known sigil. One meant for a different set of eyes. Elric returns from his campaign, 2 days into the gathering. He stands taller now. His armor fits him better, and his voice has settled deeper, but his eyes are different. Quieter. Sharper. He speaks little of the border conflict. But when a visiting noble boasts of his son's military skill, Elric asks only one question. How many men has he buried? The table goes quiet. Then someone laughs nervously, and the moment is lost. But Isolde watches her son, and knows something in him has changed. In the study, beneath the flicker of candlelight, Lord Emmerich meets with his closest vassals. There is talk of grain shortages to the east, of unrest in the northern hills, of a marriage offer from house Ellenver, one that could bring much-needed timber, but at the cost of old loyalties. The room is warm, the wine spiced, but the conversation is ice. No one speaks plainly. They circle each other like wolves. And Emmerich, for all his strength, knows he cannot afford a single misstep. Winter Court is not about winning. It is about surviving, preserving strength through appearance. Gaining inches of ground without bloodshed. Even the most innocuous request, a change in seating, a walk in the garden, a small favor for a guest carries, meaning not to be seen as too generous is weakness, too aloof, and one is hiding something. The balance is delicate, and none feel it more than those who must walk it daily. Willa, wandering the Elva library one night, finds a small book pressed between larger volumes. It is a ledger not of coin, but of names. Each marked with a different color of ink. She does not understand them all, but she sees patterns and realizes something else. Her mother has been teaching her the language of power, not through lessons, but through observation. Through silence, through invitation into this strange, intricate dance, and she is beginning to learn its steps. On the final evening of the gathering, a feast is held. The tables glitter with gold. Musicians play long into the night. There is laughter, wine, toasts. But beneath it all, a new web has been spun. One house departs with a firmer promise of alliance. Another leaves uncertain of its standing. A third will likely not be invited. Next year, nothing official has changed, and yet everything is. In the snow-covered silence that follows their departure, Windermere exhales, the castle breathes again. The game, for now, is over, but the players will remember. They always do, because winter is not only for survival. It is for calculation. And in the quiet, the real moves are made. The great hall at Windermere still smells of roasted meat. The hearths are cooling now, the last embers dim behind grates of wrought iron. Outside, the snow reflects a pale blue moonlight, casting long shadows across the silent courtyard. And in the kitchens below, the servants finally sleep. For the winter court is over. And with it, the illusion of abundance. Feasting is a noble's craft, as much as swordplay or diplomacy. To host well is to signal strength. To serve plenty is to proclaim control, not only over the land, but over time, over fate itself. The roasted boars, the spiced pies, the wine mulled with honey and cloves, all are symbols as potent as a drawn sword, but they are not conjured from nothing, and someone must always pay the cost. In the weeks before the court, Windermere's stores had been tallied and counted down to the last salted trout and sack of barley. Lady Isolde had paced the cellars with a torch in hand, her steward beside her scribbling notes with furrowed brow. The apples had held well this year, the ale barrels less so. And the flour not quite enough. They would manage. Just. For each feast. The lists are long. 4 dozen chickens, 6 hogs, 3 deer, 20 loaves a day, 2 barrels of honey. 12 jars imported olives, 1 broken en route, another spoiled. Fresh greens must be coaxed from hothouses or traded from warmer villages. Spices, the most precious of all, arrive in tightly sealed packets. Cinnamon from the Levant, saffron from Iberia, pepper black as soot. The guest may never think to ask how it came to their plate, but Isolde knows. Each coin spent here is a risk taken elsewhere. Below the castle walls, the village of Glossenhollow stirs slowly after each feast. Their stores are leaner now. The reeve had been instructed to collect a second levy before winter's close, not by choice, but by necessity. And though Lord Emmerich had ordered extra blankets sent down in secret, he knew it would not be enough. Because celebration, for all its grandeur, does not feed a village. And though the nobles toast beneath candlelight, it is the peasants who feel the cold when the stores run dry. Still, the feast must go on, even if the wine is watered, even if the third course arrives slower than the second, even if one of the hams is not quite as large as it ought to be, because to appear abundant is to remain unchallenged. To falter, to admit need, is dangerous. Especially now, when whispers from the east speak of poor harvests, and grain prices rise like smoke. ELRIC, newly returned, has begun asking questions. How many stores remain? What does a pig cost in the lower village? Why are the roads not salted for the cart horses? Isolde sees the shape of a lord forming behind his brow. Not the kind who seeks glory and tournaments, but one who worries over grain dot and watches the sky for signs of rot in the clouds dot at the last feast. Willa had noticed something too. A boy at the end of the servants' line, younger than the rest. Thin hands, hungry eyes. He had eaten the crusts behind the curtain after the lords left the table. Quickly, as if he feared being seen dot when she told her mother, Isolde only nodded. "Do not pity him," she said. "Feed him, quietly, and remember what hunger looks like." It was a lesson dot not just in charity, but in vigilance. The line between feast and famine is thin, even for the noble. A poor harvest, a broken trade route, a season of storms, and suddenly the gold in your vault cannot be eaten. Isolde remembers the year of black snow. She had been a girl then. The river froze before the harvest was milled. 4 of the neighboring estates fell into ruin. One house sold its last oxen for grain. Another gave its daughter in marriage to a merchant's son just to keep bread on the table. Those who survived remembered the lesson. And feared its return. In the weeks after the guests depart. The castle enters a different rhythm. No music echoes through the halls. The scullions speak in hushed tones. The cellars are checked twice daily. And letters are written to monasteries, to merchant guilds, to minor lords, with surplus stores and cautious hearts. Not all responses are kind, but some are. And in the careful web of favors and promises, the larder begins to fill again. Yet always, in the back of the mind, there is the truth. Feasting is fleeting. Hunger is patient, and even those wrapped in velvet and warmed by fire are not so far from its reach. This, too, is part of noble life, the art of appearing full, even when the hunger scratches faintly at the door. So the nobles of Windermere continue. They smile at the high table. They serve honey-glazed roots with silver forks. They toast the new season and dance into the night. But behind the veil of abundance, a quiet vigilance endures. And it is not only the sword that keeps the castle safe, but the ledger, the cellar, the wise hand that chooses what is served and what is saved. In the early morning, before the mist lifts from the stones of the courtyard, the clang of steel rings through Winden mere. Not in battle. A measured cadence of discipline, a language of oaths, spoken without words. This is the hour of the knights. Before court stirs, before bells toll, they are already at their work training, sparring, enduring the cold with sleeves rolled and brows dampened with frost. Sir Odo, the master-at-arms, moves like a carving of iron. He was once known across 3 duchies for his skill. Now, his joints ache in the cold, and he speaks little, but his eyes miss nothing. He teaches the squires not only how to swing a blade, but when not to. Steel should sleep unless spoken to. He tells them, and they learn not just footwork and strikes, but restraint. A knight's strength lies not in the blow he lands. But in the ones he chooses to hold. Knighthood is not granted lightly. It is earned. Over years of sweat and silence. A noble-born squire begins at 7 or 8. At first, his tasks are humble: cleaning armor, caring for horses, memorizing prayers. Then comes swordplay, horsemanship, reading scrolls of chivalric codes. The code is sacred: honor, loyalty, courage, mercy. Simple words, heavy with consequence. Some treat it as poetry, others live it as law, and some forget it the moment their sword is kissed by sunlight. Helric remembers his own vigil, the night before his knighting. A quiet, candlelit watch in the chapel, his sword resting before him, his armor polished by his own hand. He had been told to pray. To reflect, to consider what it meant to wield death with permission. He did, and when dawn came, and the priest anointed his brow, he felt something settle on his shoulders heavier than steel. Responsibility. Not all knights are noble born. Some rise from the ranks of commoners, granted the title by a grateful lord, or recognized on the battlefield for bravery. These men are often scorned by high houses, but among the true knights, their worth is rarely questioned. For in the yard, bloodline means less than discipline, and a man's loyalty is measured in scars, not silk. Willow watches the knights train from the parapet. She sees their movements, the same each morning over and over again. To some, it would seem dull. To her, it speaks of quiet devotion, a faith without hymns. She knows many of their names. Sir Odo, of course. Sir Baron, who limps from an old wound. Sir Jarek, whose laughter breaks the winter stillness now and then. But there are others she doesn't know so well. Knights who say little, who sleep in the barracks instead of the hall, who write no letters home. Some of them have nowhere to write. 2. Knighthood, for all its glory, is a life of sacrifice. Most will never own land. Few will marry. Their armor is not just worn, it becomes part of them. An outer shell to protect what is often bruised within. They are trained to serve and to die, not for coin, but for name, for house, for honor. Still, honor is not always rewarded. Some die forgotten, buried nameless at the edge of a battlefield. Some are sent on errands no noble would risk themselves for: a border dispute, a band of thieves, a message too dangerous to send by raven. And yet they go. Because knighthood is not about comfort. It is about duty. And in that, they find something greater than themselves. Sir Odo carries an old wound along his ribs. He earned it protecting Lord Emmerich's father during a siege that no bard remembers. No statue bears his likeness. No song sings his name. But each morning, his footsteps still echo first in the yard, even when it snows, even when it rains, even when the younger knights offer to take his place. He simply nods, grips his cane, and walks on. Sometimes the code breaks before the night does. There are those who falter, who betray. Who turn sword against oath. Windermere has known this too. A knight who stole from the treasury. Another who fled during a border skirmish. A third who grew too close to a lady already promised. Their names are not spoken aloud, but they are remembered in silence. In the tightened jaw of Emric. In the way, Elric double-checks the barracks rosters each month. In the quiet absence at the feast table where once a loyal shield stood. Yet still they endure, through war and frost and time's slow turning. Because knighthood, despite its hardships, offers something rare in this world. A purpose, a way to stand between the fragile and the cruel. To lift a shield not for oneself, but for something worth preserving. For a child behind a castle wall, for a village in the path of raiders, for a lord who trusts without question, or even, perhaps, for a girl watching from a tower window, dreaming of stories the bards no longer sing. In the stillness of evening, when the snow hushes even the wind, the knights of Windermere return to their barracks. They do not speak much. They do not need to. Their oaths are made, their blades clean. And as the moonlight shines faintly on their helms, you might just believe the old songs again, if only for a moment. The hall is quiet now. The knights have returned to their barracks. The fires burn low. And above it all, in a chamber lined with carved cedar and tapestries of faded glory, Lady Isolde sits with her ledger. No music plays, only the scratch of her quill and the weight of decisions no one will sing about. It is a strange thing. The title of Lady. To some, it suggests softness, gowns and gardens, needlework and lullabies. But in Windermere and in many noble houses across the land, it means something else entirely. It means power. Quiet, patient, unseen, but unmistakably real. Isolde did not ask for this life. Born to a minor count in the West, She was married at 17, part alliance, part dowry, part necessity. She wept once, on the journey to Windermere, then never again, because from the moment she stepped into the castle's stone embrace, she understood something vital. If she could not command fate, she would at least shape its corners. A noblewoman, properly trained, is not merely a wife. She is the second steward of the estate, the keeper of household economies, the guardian of inheritance and name. She knows every servant's name, every annual yield, every wheat timber in the grain barn. She writes letters in 6 tongues. She reads faces better than books. And she never forgets. A broken promise. Isolde rises at dawn. Before the bells, before the bread is baked. She checks the accounts, oversees the cooks, reviews the physician's reports. When a trade caravan arrives from the southern ports, it is she, not her husband, who negotiates the price of linen. When an abbess writes with requests for funds, it is she who weighs mercy against mathematics. And when young Willa asks why the world expects less of women, she smiles faintly and says, because the world has not learned how much we can hold without raising our voices. There is power in subtlety. Men may march in parades and duel at dawn, but women govern in silences. At court, glance can seal an alliance or undo one. A whispered word, timed perfectly, can turn favor into exile. When Isolde attends council, she speaks last. And when she does, even Lord Emmerich listens. Not all women have her strength, nor her chance. Some noble ladies are caged in luxury, married to strangers, used as pawns, then forgotten. But even there, behind painted fans and lace, many learn to wield what they can. A smile becomes armor. A child becomes a claim. A memory becomes leverage. Willa watches her mother closely now. She used to see only the gowns, the grace, the carefully braided hair. But as she grows, she sees the weight behind her mother's stillness, a calculation in her pauses, the way she always knows who is standing where, even when facing the other direction. Willa is 13. Her lessons in arithmetic are almost done, but her real education has just begun. Isolde has made mistakes. She has trusted when she should not. Years ago, she permitted a merchant's son too. Close to the GRNARR, east. By the time she discovered the theft, 2 months' barley had vanished downriver. She said nothing to her husband. She fixed it herself, ordered quiet restitution, barred the merchant's house from the region. And doubled the castles ledgers in response. No punishment was public, but no mistake was ever made again. There are moments she doubts herself. On winter nights, when the wind howls like old ghosts, she sits alone by the fire and thinks of what might have been. Had she married someone else. Had she been born a man? Had she refused the match and run? But each time, she sets the thoughts aside, because the truth is this: she has built something lasting. Not a monument, not a poem, but a legacy made of choices few ever see. Lady Isolde has no sword, but she has ended feuds before they began. She has saved the castle from ruin more than once. She has raised children with clear eyes and cautious hearts. And if the walls ever fall, it will not be because she was found sleeping. Women of noble birth often walk a narrow road. Too bold, and they are feared. Too quiet, and they are dismissed. But those who master the balance become something formidable, something soft. Yes, but never weak. Windermere stands tall, not just on stone and steel, but on the shoulders of a woman who has bent beneath burdens that would have broken kings. So, when the court speaks of Lord Emmerich, they speak of his justice. When they whisper of Elric, they speak of his potential. But when they mention Isolde, they lower their voices. As if sensing that her power lies not in name, but in the silence between syllables. The kind of power that does not need to be declared to be felt. Kind of power that holds a castle together, even when no one is watching. The castle sleeps, or so it seems. Above, the noble chambers dim their fires. Curtains are drawn. The last wine is poured. Silence settles like snow. But below, just beneath the tapestries, under the floorboards, through tunnels of stone and smoke another, rhythm continues. The rhythm of the household staff, the hidden pulse of Windermere. Before dawn touches the sky, it begins. A pot creaks over flame. A footstep echoes in the kitchen, and in the darkness, a girl named Ellen carries a basket of flour to the bakery ovens, her breath fogging in the chill. She is 13. The same age as Willa, but her days begin earlier. And her hands bear more calluses. Then rings. There are dozens of servants in Windermere, some born to the house like Ellen, others sent from distant manors, or taken in as orphans during lean years. Each has a place in the woven order. The scullery maids, the stable hands, the cooks and the coopers, the tailors, the scribes, the washerwomen, and the pages. Their names are rarely written in chronicles. They are whispered in corridors, shouted in kitchens, murmured in prayer. They are the ones who know how everything truly works. Old Margaret has scrubbed the same stone steps for 53 winters. She knows who walks with a heavy tread, who tucks letters beneath the second stair, and who weeps behind the pantry door when the world above grows too heavy. She says little, but she sees all, and she keeps more secrets than any noble ever dared confess. The kitchen is its own court, ruled not by crown, but by copper pots and wooden spoons. Master Hugh, the head cook, commands his team like a general. Timing is sacred. Measurements are law. And no one dares touch the stew without his nod. At feasts, the nobility toast and praise the pheasant or venison, but none remember the hands that brined, carved and spiced it with care long before the trumpet sounded. Ellen's mother, Marda, works in the laundry. She spends her days with ash soap and bruised knuckles, tending to the fine silks and coarser tunics alike. She once embroidered for Lady Isolda's mother. Now she scrubs collars with quiet pride. When asked if she resents it, she smiles softly. There's peace in honest work, she says, and warmth too, if you know where to look. The stables, too, are a world of their own. Young Jaron has worked there since he could lift a bucket. He knows the temperament of every horse, which stallion kicks when startled, which mare won't eat oats unless someone sings. He speaks little to the nobles, but when Elric passes by, he nods with respect. It was Jaron who calmed Elric's horse during last year's storm. He was not thanked, but he did not expect to be. Servants live where the air is thick with coal, smoke, and the walls sweat. In winter. Their beds are narrow, their hours long, their work relentless. Yet among them is a camaraderie noble families rarely know. They share bread, stories, sorrow, and laughter. They celebrate births with a quiet cup of ale, and mourn passings with hushed songs sung by the fire. No banners are lowered for them, but hearts are. The castle's health depends on these hands. When illness spreads, it is the servants who clean the sick beds. When floods threaten, they are first to sandbag the stores. When guests arrive unexpectedly, it is they who transform chaos into grace. They are invisible until something goes wrong. Then suddenly, everyone sees. Still, not all is hardship. There are joys. Even here. In the spring, they gather herbs from the southern slopes. At midsummer, they dance by the moonlight in the old orchard. Sometimes Willa sneaks down to watch. Once she even joined them, barefoot in the dew, laughing beside Ellen as the kitchen boys clapped in rhythm. She was scolded gently the next day, but never forgot the warmth. And sometimes love grows in the quiet corners. A stable hand and a dairy maid exchange glances near the grain bins. A page offers An extra slice of cake from the kitchen's little things, soft and secret, because in their world, love must be woven between chores, whispered in hallways, written in flour on tabletops. There is risk. A servant seen in the wrong corridor, a misplaced item, a rumor. Punishments vary. A demotion, a whipping, sometimes dismissal. For many, the castle is their only home. Beyond its walls, there is hunger, cold, uncertainty. So they walk carefully, speak softly, and survive through knowing more than they say. Lady Isolde understands their value. She speaks their names, keeps their wages regular. When she can. And ensures their children have wintersea loaks. It's not kindness. She tells herself. It's wisdom. For a castle is only as strong as the people who sweep its corners. As night falls again, and the nobles dine by candlelight. Ellen wipes her flour-stained hands and watches from the scullery door. She hears laughter echo down the marble halls, then turns back to her work. She will rise again before dawn. She always does. And though her name may never be carved into stone, her labor is. For beneath every great hall, behind every silken curtain, and beneath every embroidered tapestry, there is a world unseen, a world that breathes, carries, and holds. The world of the servants, the heartbeat of the castle. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the breath of winter against the walls of Windermere. Snow drifted against the shutters. The scent of wood smoke curling beneath every archway. And deep within the castle, silence thick, still, and reverent. This is where the year begins. Not with a trumpet, but with frost. In the medieval world, the calendar was not ruled by paper and ink. It was ruled by the land. And the land, like an old and patient teacher, spoke with the seasons. Each month whispered its lesson. And even nobles surrounded by carved thrones and golden platters had no choice but to listen. Winter was the time of inward breath. The fields lay barren beneath a quilt of ice. Travel slowed to a crawl, if it happened at all. Within the castle, windows were shuttered tight, fires banked high, and meals grew heavier. Root vegetables, salted meat, dense breads soaked in wine. Children played games indoors. Lords sharpened blades in silence, and ladies embroidered by the fire, their needles gleaming in the glow. It was a time of story, of stillness, of survival. But even in the hush, work did not sleep. Servants hauled firewood in shifts. Chandlers poured new candles from precious tallow. Masons, unable to build in the frost, repaired tools and carved tokens for spring. And behind closed doors, plans for the new year began to take shape. Letters written, deals considered, marriages whispered about over mulled wine. As the days grew longer, the castle stirred. Spring arrived, not in sudden blooms, but in subtle signals. The drip of thawing snow, the first green blades rising between brown earth, the smell of damp stone returning to the air. And with it came the true labor of the year. Fields were plowed and sown, not by noble hands, but by their command. The lord of the castle oversaw the management of seed and beast. He rode the borders of his estate with his reeve, inspecting damage from winter storms, ensuring tenants had what they needed to plant a new. In the gardens closest to the keep, herbs returned, sage, mint, thyme greeted like old friends, and the kitchens came alive with new flavors. Eggs grew more plentiful, milk flowed again, and the feasts of Lent gave way to Easter celebrations, full of brightness and light. Spring was also a season of alliances. With the roads passable again, visitors came sometimes for counsel, often for marriage talks. Daughters dressed in gowns, the color of blossoms. Sons were groomed like young hawks. There was promise in the air. And uncertainty, because the future, like the weather, was never entirely in one's control. Then came summer. The castle breathed wide again. windows thrown open, tapestries aired on balconies, flags flapping in warm wind. It was the season of outward motion, hunting, hawking, and tournaments, courtly love, legal disputes heard in the great hall, with the smell of roses outside. But for all the splendor, summer was not leisure. It was labor. Fields needed tending. Hay needed cutting. The estate was in full. Swing caravans arrived more frequently, bringing spices, glass, and silk. Repairs to roofs and walls were made while the sun held. Noble children studied more closely now languages, music, theology, for their futures loomed larger in the heat. Even pleasure held. Purpose. A marriage might be sealed at a midsummer feast. Favor might be won with the right word beneath a full moon. And always, summer carried its risks. Illness, bred in the heat, storms, sudden and fierce, and war always easier when the ground was dry and the sun long got. So while the gardens bloomed, swords were sharpened still. Then, without warning, autumn would arrive. Golden hush fell across the land. The trees, in quiet splendor, cast their leaves like forgotten letters, and the castle began to prepare. Harvest was both celebration and strain. At the granaries swelled with barley, wheat, and rye. Fruits were preserved. Meats were cured. The lord and lady often walked the grounds more frequently in this season, ensuring no corner of their estate was neglected. For if the harvest failed, winter would not wait. It was also a time of reckoning. Accounts were tallied. Rent was collected. Tithes were sent to the church, and the castle standing in the realm was measured not in coin, but in how well it fed its people. Lady Isolde oversaw the ledgers. Elric rode to outlying villages, learning the faces of those he would someday lead, and Willa began to understand why her mother counted sacks of grain with more intensity than embroidery threads. As the days shortened, the castle grew quieter again. The final festivals came: Michaelmas, with its fires and bread, and All Hallows Eve, with its shadows and superstitions. Torches burned lower, blankets were sewn thicker, the castle braced itself. And so the wheel turned. To live in a medieval castle was not to live apart from nature, but in rhythm with it, a rhythm older than stone, older than scrolls, a rhythm written in wind and rain, in sunrise and snowfall. And even behind the thickest walls, no one escaped it. The seasons told the nobles who they were. Winter reminded them of limits. Spring whispered of hope. Summer tested their strength. Autumn measured their worth. And through it all, the castle stood, not unmoved, but deeply in tune with the turning world beyond its walls. The long table is set. Polished pewter glints in the glow of torches. Fresh herbs scatter across linens embroidered with gold thread. A boar's head roasted, gleaming, sits at the center, its mouth stuffed with apples and cloves. This is how most imagine the noble feast. Abundant, decadent, eternal. But like all things within the castle walls, it is both more and less than it seems. In truth, the feast was not daily. It was not constant. It was ritual, a performance of power, a theater of order. And though the food might appear endless, even the most noble kitchens could not conjure plenty. From barren fields, Windermere, like most castles, had two faces of food: the public feast and the private meal. Feasts were reserved for holy days, marriages, treaties, and funerals. They marked the seasons, the victories, the visits of distant cousins or neighboring lords. They were rehearsed, planned for weeks. The lord and lady might taste the finest game, exotic spices, and sweet wines brought from the south. But not everyone at the table shared equally. Meals were divided by rank. At the high table, seated on a dais, the nobility dined in measured elegance. Below them, at lesser tables, knights and vice, stewards, and further still, perhaps in a different hall entirely, servants and grooms ate simpler fare, sometimes cold, Sometimes the remnants of what remained. There was no shame in this. It was the order of things, but it spoke volumes about how food was more than nourishment. It was status. It was ceremony. It was control. The daily meals when no guests arrived and no feast was called were far humbler. A typical noble breakfast, if taken at all, might be a piece of bread, a slice of cold meat, a small ale. The main meal came near midday. Bread, pottage, roasted poultry if available, fresh greens in summer, pickled roots in winter, fish, especially on Fridays. The evening might bring a lighter repast, a stew, or porridge, eaten by the hearth in quiet. Much depended on the season. In summer, gardens brimmed with parsley, leeks, and sage. In winter, salt was king. Meats preserved in brine or smoke. Grains stored in sacks lined with oilcloth. Cheeses aged carefully in cool cellars. There were years when the harvest was poor, when rain ruined the wheat. And even the nobility had to tighten their belts. Windermere had a room beneath the eastern wing where Lady Isolde kept the grain teas locked, not out of cruelty, but survival. The cooks were the unseen magicians of this world. Hugh knew not only how to roast a goose or glaze a ham, but how to stretch the smallest, cut into a broth that felt rich. He knew what herbs masked the taste of meat, just beginning to turn, which wines sweetened a bitter sauce, and which pies must be sealed twice if they were to last through a 3-day journey. His kitchen was organized, like an army. Bread bakers rose before the sun. Spit turners blistered their hands beside open flame, and scullions ran with bruised knuckles and blistered feet. Presentation mattered almost as much as taste. Peacocks were plucked, roasted, and then redressed in their own shimmering feathers. Custards were dyed with saffron or marigold for effect. Jellied fish set in molded dishes. A feast was a symbol. Not just of what one had, but of who one was. And in times of political tension, a full table said more than 1,000 words. Yet behind the scenes, food scarcity was never far away. If a shipment of salt fish was delayed by storms, if a cow fell ill before winter slaughter, if the river froze and the eels could not be caught, even noble households could feel the sting. Willa once asked her mother why she blessed every loaf. Lady Isolde looked at her daughter gently and replied, "Because grain does not grow for gold. It grows for grace." That winter, the harvest had been poor. Bread was thinner. Porridge more frequent. And the feasts, when they came, were quieter. There was a subtle language in food. To offer someone the first cut of meat was a mark of honor. To deny wine at a table might suggest disapproval. Even the spices one used could whisper power. Cinnamon and nutmeg, brought from distant lands at high cost, were not just for flavor, but for prestige. Not everyone at Windermere had equal access to these treasures. The servants had their own kitchen, their own bread coarser, darker, made with barley or rye instead of wheat. Their stews were heavier, their meats fewer. But in their company, meals were shared more freely. Laughter traveled further. And no one sat alone. There were times, of course, when true hunger came, a failed harvest, a siege or war. Then the castle relied on stores, smoked meats, salted herring, hard cheese, dried peas, black bread. The lord and lady would eat last, but they would eat. Their power was, in part, their ability to provide. And their downfall, when they could not. Food in Windermere was never just food. It was prayer. It was politics. It was poetry, written in flour and flame. And while the feast may dazzle in memory, it is the simple meal, the daily bowl of pottage, the shared hunk of cheese that truly fed the bones of noble life. So when you next see a painting of a grand medieval banquet, look beyond the golden goblets. Listen for the footsteps of the cook. Smell the smoke of the kitchen fire. And remember, every feast had a cost, and every meal a meaning. When the dawn broke over Windermere, it did so not with clamor, but with a bell, a low, distant toll that echoed through the stone corridors like the breath of God himself. The chapel bell calling all within earshot to matins morning prayers, before bread, before words, before thought. The soul was summoned. Religion was not separate from life in the medieval castle. It was life. As present as the hearth, as constant as the sky. From birth to burial, the noble path was braided tightly with sacred thread. Every child was baptized within days of being born, a ritual as vital as breath. Priests invited to witness the first cry held tiny bodies over blessed water, murmuring ancient Latin that echoed across generations. To die unbaptized, it was believed, meant a soul adrift, denied heaven's gates. And so, even in snowstorms, a priest was fetched, even at midnight, even if the child would not see the sunrise. Willa was christened in Windermere's small stone chapel, beneath the gaze of stained glass saints. She could not remember the ceremony, but she would grow to remember the space, cool stone underfoot, the smell of beeswax, the ever-burning lamp above the altar. Her earliest memories included prayer, not as obligation, but as rhythm, a whisper that filled the spaces between breath and sleep. The noble family observed the canonical hours, a series of daily prayers that marked the passage of time. Matins in the early morning, lauds with the first light, prime, terce, sext, and none throughout the day, vespers at dusk, compline before bed. They did not always attend each one in person, especially not the children, but the sound of the bells was constant, a reminder. That time belonged first to God. Each day began with a blessing, each meal with a prayer, and every journey, no matter how small, began with a gesture of the cross. Before a letter was sealed, a holy invocation was written, and before a sword was drawn, a vow was often spoken. Even war, grim and brutal, marched beneath banners emblazoned with saints. The church was not only a house of worship, it was a force. It owned land. It advised kings. It recorded law. And for the nobility, it offered both salvation and structure. Confession was regular, communion sacred, tithes were owed, and paid with both coin and livestock. No noble estate was considered whole without a chaplain or confessor. Many families, like Windermere's, maintained their own private chapel, tucked within the keep like a heart within the chest. But religion was not only practiced in chapels. It lived in charms, stitched into sleeves. In relics kept in carved ivory, boxes. In candles lit before battle, in prayers whispered for rain. It was in the pilgrimage sandal, worn smooth by the walk to Canterbury. In the lady's rosary, her fingers curled around the beads like a child gripping a mother's hand. Elric once fasted for 7 days after a hunting accident left his friend wounded. Not for healing, exactly, but for humility, a way to bow before something greater. And Isolde, during the darkest months of one harsh winter, commissioned a silver reliquary to house a tiny bone fragment of Saint Apollonia, believed to guard against sickness and sorrow. Was it superstition? Perhaps, but it was also faith. And faith gave form to fear. Holy days marked the calendar more firmly than any secular event. Easter brought feasts and flowers. All Saints' Day wrapped the castle in reverent silence. Advent turned the halls into places of quiet preparation. Each season brought its saints. Each village its procession. And when the bells rang for a holy feast, even the kitchens paused, even the hammers fell still. With faith came burden, for the nobility were held to account not only by men, but by God. They were stewards of people, land, and souls, and every act, just or cruel, was weighed in the scale of eternity. Guilt walked beside power, and penance both public and private, was a constant companion. Some nobles took the cloth. A second son might join a monastery, not out of reluctance, but reverence. A daughter might retire to a convent if her dowry failed, or if she chose a life of prayer above all and even lords. After lives of war and wealth, sometimes ended their days beneath a monk's robe. Chanting psalms at dawn in exchange for peace. Pilgrimages were one of the highest acts of devotion. A journey not for conquest or coin, but for the soul. To Santiago, to Rome, to the Holy Land. To touch the soil where saints once wept. Willa dreamed, in her 15th year, of making such a journey, not for absolution, but for understanding. To see how far faith stretched beyond her father's walls. And when death came, religion offered the only true map. A priest was summoned. A candle was lit. The dying were anointed, their sins named, their souls commended. The funeral procession, with black-cloaked mourners and tolling bells, reminded all who watched, this world is fleeting. The next, eternal. In Windermere, the chapel bell rang often, not always for joy, not always for mourning, but always. To remind the living that they were dust and breath, to remind the noble that they too must kneel, and to remind the world that even stone crumbles, but the soul does not. So when you look upon the ruins of a forgotten castle and see the chapel crumbled into vine and silence, know that it once beat like a heart, not loud, but steady, a sacred rhythm beneath the clamor of swords, the rustle of silks, and the sighs of kings. The wind at Windermere softened as spring arrived, threading through narrow windows and lifting the hems of woolen gowns. In the solar, where the women spent much of their day, the light danced gently on tapestries, spindle wheels, and parchment. Scrolls. It was not a loud room. But it was not idle. Here, decisions were made, stories were passed, futures were stitched together in silk and thread. This was the realm of the noblewoman. And like many realms, it was built on a delicate balance of silence and strength. Lady Isolde sat by the window each morning with her ledger. She tracked the grain, the servants, the correspondence from nearby estates, the births, the deaths. Few outside the walls understood how much power a noblewoman held, not in title, but in knowledge. She was the keeper of the household, yes, but also its pulse. Without her, the rhythm faltered. For a noblewoman, life began with lessons. Before a girl was old enough to string her own necklace, she was taught to curtsy, to recite prayers, to hold her tongue in a room full of men. By 10, Willa could read Latin, spin flax into linen, identify healing herbs, and memorize the ancestry of half the noble houses in the Shire. These were not idle skills. They were weapons, quiet ones, used to shape alliances, manage land, and survive court. Marriage was not a matter of choice. It was a matter of strategy. At 14 or 15, a girl might be betrothed. At 16, she could be wed, and with that union came land, titles, heirs, and expectation. Love was sometimes present, but never guaranteed. What mattered was loyalty, not fertility, discretion, and endurance. Lady Isolde had been married to Lord Aldrich when she was only 16. She did not love him at first, but she learned to respect him, and in time, as seasons passed and children were born and buried, that respect softened into something more tender. It was not the love of poems or courtly songs. It was the love of shared burdens. Of facing winters together. Of understanding one another's silence. A noblewoman's duties were many. She oversaw the household, meals, linens, education of children, care of the sick, management of servants. She mediated disputes among staff, negotiated with tenants, and at times handled estate affairs when her husband was at war or at court. She embroidered, yes, but she also managed the accounts. She prayed, Yes, but she also petitioned bishops and barons. Power did not always wear armor. Sometimes it wore soft slippers and carried a ring of keys. Pregnancy was both a blessing and a risk. Each birth was a crossing, each child a prayer made flesh. Lady Isolde had borne 7. Only 4 survived to walk, and even those she watched with constant hope and constant fear. There were no physicians at Windermere, only midwives and faith. And in the hush of candlelight, as women gathered to bring new life into the world, the chamber became both cradle and altar. Friendship among noble women was often the truest refuge. Willa's nurse, Ellen, though technically a servant, was her confidant from childhood into early womanhood. In the still hours between sunset and prayer, they whispered of dreams, Ellen of freedom, Willa of seeing the sea. The world beyond Windermere was distant, but within those walls, friendship became a form of resistance, a way of choosing something when so little could be chosen. And yet, despite their quiet station, noblewomen could wield profound influence. A word to the right priest, a carefully chosen gift to a rival's daughter, a letter sent with carefully turned phrases. Behind the scenes, alliances were made and broken by women's hands. Not loudly. But with precision. At court, the presence of a noble woman could shift the mood of a king or soften the fury of a baron. Beauty helped, certainly. But wit, that helped more. A clever word, a composed gaze, a smile that said nothing but promised everything. It was a language few spoke openly, but those who knew it knew its power. And if her husband died, the noblewoman became a dowager free in ways she had never been before. She could manage land in her own name, command servants, live where she wished, within limits. And in that twilight of her life, she often held more control than she had in all her youthful days. It was a freedom bought by years of duty. And grief. Lady Isolde once told Willa, power is not always in who speaks loudest. Sometimes it lives in who listens longest. Willa remembered this when years later she sat in her mother's place balancing ledgers, soothing disputes, cradling her own child in the crook of her arm while planning a tenant's harvest. World rarely sang songs about nobility.Ing. They were too quiet for poetry, too constant for legend. But if one listened closely, if one looked past the banners and swords, you would see them there, behind every throne and every gate, not invisible, only overlooked. So when you think of medieval lords, imagine also their wives, their mothers, their daughters, walking long halls, whispering counsel, lighting candles in chapels for sons who went to war. And know that their hands soft, scarred, skillful, shaped just as much of that world as any man's sword. The older towers of Windermere had begun to lean ever so slightly with time, their stones weathered by the same winds that now curled gently around the shoulders of Lord Eldrick. As he walked the eastern wall. His stride was slower, not uncertain only. Considered. There was no rush now. No call to battle, no letters to sign, no feasts to host. Time at last had softened its grip, and in that softening something tender bloomed. Not weakness, but reflection. To grow old in the medieval world was to witness many endings of summers, of kin, of self. But for nobles who lived long enough to reach their later years, a rare gift in its own right. Old age was not always a curse. It could be, in its way, a kind of peace. Lord Eldrick spent his mornings reading now, not letters, not orders, but psalms and histories, their pages worn and fragrant with candle smoke. He watched the gardens with more reverence than he had as a young man. He listened longer, and when his grandchildren ran through the corridors he once marched in, he smiled not with ambition, but with memory. Old age for nobles was often spent in the solar or a small private chamber warmed by the hearth. There they sat wrapped in wool, bones aching in the damp seasons. Fingers curled gently over prayer beads or cups of honeyed wine. Some turned to faith with new intensity, praying not for victory, but for forgiveness. Some turned inward, walking through the corridors of memory as though they were stone hallways. Lady Isolde, her hair now silver as moonlight, had grown quieter still, not because she lacked things to say, but because she chose. Her words with the precision of someone who understood time was now counted in winters, not decades. She no longer walked far. She no longer sat long, but she remained the soul of Windermere, present in every decision, every pause, every blessing at table. With age came a change in purpose. No longer protectors, they became teachers. No longer decision-makers, they became advisors. Their words were not orders, but wisdom passed down. To ignore an elder's voice was to risk repeating history. To heed it was to carry on something ancient and steady. Not all grew old with peace. Some faced illness slow, creeping loss of sight, of movement, of memory. Some, like Lord Aldrich's cousin Oswin, once a fierce rider, now sat in a chair by the fire and spoke only in fragments, confusing names and years, staring long at his hands as if trying to remember what they once held. There was sorrow in this, but also tenderness, for the family did not turn away. They drew closer, and in that, the nobility of care revealed itself. Grief came more often. Friends passed, children, sometimes two. And with each loss, the noble grew quieter, not from despair, but from reverence. Life, they knew, was a flickering thing, not to be feared, but to be held carefully, like the last embers of a fire. Preparations for death were never far, not out of morbid obsession, but acceptance. Wills were written, heirlooms named, land divided. Priests were invited more often. Candles burned longer. A coffin was sometimes commissioned years before it would be used, carved with saints and prayers and family sigils. It was not seen as surrender, but readiness. In these final years, many nobles gave alms more freely. They funded repairs to the village chapel, donated grain to the poor in winter, sent gold to distant abbeys in exchange for prayers said in their name, not out of guilt, but legacy. To leave behind something more lasting than walls or titles. To be remembered not only as lord or lady, but as soul. And when the time finally came, when breath grew thin and the days grew short, the castle grew still. A priest was summoned. Family gathered. Hands were held. Forgiveness was spoken aloud, sometimes for the first time in years, and the dying were given time not just to pass, but to be seen. To be honored. To be loved. Lady Isolde passed on a spring morning, with her hand in Willa's and the chapel bell tolling once every minute. She had asked for lavender placed near her bed, for the psalms to be whispered softly, and for the window to be left open. So her soul, she said, might find the sky more easily. Lord Aldrich followed months later, in winter, wrapped in the same cloak he'd worn the day he first rode to Windermere. He had been a soldier, a lord, a father, and a husband. But in his final days, he had been a listener, a rememberer, a man who watched snowfall not as obstacle, but as beauty. And so their coffins were placed in the family crypt, not grand, but carved with care. Their names, simple, their legacy, quiet, their love, enduring. Willa stood over them both with her child in her arms, and felt the deep stillness of time itself. She did not weep loudly, only bowed her head. And gave thanks. To grow old in the medieval world was a privilege and a reckoning, a season of gentleness earned by years of storm. And for those who reached it with dignity, there was no need for great monuments. The lives they shaped stood tall enough. The hearth in Windermere's great hall had burned low. Only a few amber coals flickered beneath the blackened wood. Morning birds sang faintly outside, as if unsure whether to stir the day. Willa stood before the family tapestry. She was older. Now dot lines traced her face like soft brushstrokes. Her hands bore the small aches of age, but her eyes still held the same steadiness that Lady Isolde once carried. Her daughter, young and full of questions, had asked her just that. Morning, what happens when we are gone? Will anyone remember? Willa did not answer right away. She simply turned toward the tapestry and began to tell the story. Noble's death did not erase their presence, Dot. It deepened it. Long after Lord Aldrich and Lady Isolde were buried in stone, their habits lingered, Dot, in the way servants arranged the morning table, in the herbs planted near the well, in the way Willa blessed the bread before breaking it. Dot, legacy, after all, was not just carved in stone, Dot. It was lived, every day. Windermere Castle bore their mark, Dot, not loudly, Dot, but certainly. The stone step Lord Aldrich had always skipped, it still bore. A shallow groove. The narrow window where Lady Isolde sat to read still caught the same morning light. The garden she tended bloomed each spring, not with grandeur, but familiarity. Those who knew could feel them, Dot, not haunting, only humming, like the faint echo of a song. Legacy among nobles was often ensured through documentation. Scrolls, seals, chronicles penned by monks, with stiff fingers and fading ink. Wills were stored in wooden chests. Marriage contracts tucked into abbey libraries. Land deeds pressed between layers of wax. But even the written word could fade. And so, stories remained, Dot, at winter feasts, when the wind curled against the walls and the wine warmed the room. The children would gather near. The fire, that was when Willa would speak. Of Lord Aldrich's famous patience, the way he once calmed a riot with only a nod. Of Lady Isolde's hidden garden, where she had buried letters meant only for Willa to find. Of the time snow fell so thick that the castle was silent for 3 whole days, and how they spent it singing hymns. The children listened, not with reverence, but curiosity, Dot, to them. Those noble ancestors were not legends. They were family. Sometimes Willa would ride out beyond the castle walls, back to the village where old women still remembered being fed in famine, to the chapel where her father had funded the stained glass window of St. Ethelred, to the stone cross where her mother's name was carved beside her father's. In clean, unadorned lettering, Dot, there she would pause, not to pray, but to remember. And in that act alone, their legacy lived on. For the common folk, remembrance was spoken aloud, a name said over bread, a tale retold when the moon was high, a melody hummed that had once been heard through castle windows. Dot, the nobles of the land were not always loved, but those who were kind, were carried forward in stories, and the stories traveled further than walls ever could, even in the changing world. As new lords took new seats and Windermere's roof was repaired with foreign tile, there remained a certain feeling. In the halls, Dot, a warmth, a knowing. Some called it the spirit of the place. Others called it tradition. But Willa called it memory, Dot, not as something fading, but as something living. Dot, as her daughter grew, Willa passed down more than stories. She passed down rituals. The lighting of a certain candle on St. Bridget's Eve, the way bread was broken with both hands, never cut, the silent nod given to the eastern wind on the first day of spring. Dot, these were small things, but they were sacred, for they tethered the past to the present. They made ghosts into ancestors. Dot, in time. Willa, too, grew frail. Dot, and one morning, after watching the frost melt slowly off the garden's edge, she closed her eyes and did not wake. Her daughter, now a woman, stood where Willa once stood, before the same tapestry, and when her own child asked, "What happens when we are gone?" she smiled and said, "Let me tell you a story, because that's how it continues, isn't it? Not through thrones or crowns, not through titles carved on stone, or songs sung for kings, but through the gentle retelling of names, through memories, stitched into tapestries and souls, through warm hands guiding younger ones through familiar halls. And Noble's life did not end with their death. It echoed. It softened. It lived on. And perhaps that is the quiet truth of all legacy. It is not about being remembered by all, but being remembered truly by a few. So as we close this long, gentle journey into the lives of medieval European nobles, let the world fall quiet around you. Let the fire fade to embers. Let your breath slow. And know that somewhere, beneath the stones of old castles and the pages of older books, these lives still hum soft as silk, strong as oak, and patient as time. Good night.